Warning: the following story contains graphic descriptions of violence, mental illness, and murder. I never imagined this would happen to me, that I'd be the one writing these words, cold, shaking, drenched in blood that isn't entirely my own. The whispers started a week ago, but the fear has been growing for years. It began with small things, really. A shadow where there shouldn't be one, a creaking floorboard when I was home alone. I tried to ignore it, convinced myself it was paranoia. But it was on August 12, 2012, when everything changed. That's the day I stopped being afraid of the dark and started being afraid of myself. School was always hell. The constant jeers, the subtle shoves in the hallway, the way they would surround me and hurl their venomous words, stabbing me with insults until I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just smiled, like a good boy, and told myself they didn't matter. I told myself I was stronger than them. But on August 12th, they found out how wrong I was. I remember every detail of that day. The blistering heat that pressed down on my skin, the way the sky seemed too bright, like the world was mocking me. It was supposed to be a day like any other. The last few weeks before school started, when everyone was trying to squeeze in as much fun as possible before the inevitable. Except for me. Fun was a luxury I couldn't afford. By the time the clock struck midnight, something inside me snapped. It wasn't sudden, not really. It was more like a rope slowly fraying, thread by thread, until it couldn't hold the weight any longer. The rope broke, and I was free. The first person I saw was Jessica. Perfect Jessica, with her perfect smile and perfect life. She never missed a chance to remind me of how much better she was. I'd heard the whispers about her, about what she'd done, the lies she'd spread, the lives she'd ruined. And that day, I decided it was time for her to feel the pain she inflicted on others. She didn't hear me coming. I was quiet, almost too quiet. The look on her face when she turned around and saw the knife, it was like she'd finally seen me for the first time. The real me. And that's when I knew she'd always been afraid, but she never showed it. Until now, the first slash was quick, deep, efficient. The blood was warm, sticky as it sprayed onto my hands, onto my face. She tried to scream, but it came out as a gurgle, a pathetic, wet noise. I watched the light fade from her eyes, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse. Just an overwhelming sense of calm, but Jessica was just the beginning. She was the appetizer, the warm-up. There were others, so many others who needed to pay for what they'd done to me. The town was small, the streets dark and empty at that hour. It was too easy to slip through the night like a shadow, unseen and unstoppable. I became their puppet, my hands moving without my control, my mind a fog of violence and hate. I hunted in the night, moving from town to town, leaving a trail of bodies in my wake. The newspapers called me a monster, a psychopath. They were right. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know about the whispers, about the fear that had taken hold of me and refused to let go. I'm writing this now because I know my time is running out. The whispers are getting louder, drowning out my thoughts, my sense of self. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. But I want you to know, if you're reading this, you're already in danger. Because the fear is contagious. And once it takes hold, there's no escaping it. August 12, 2012, was the day I stopped being afraid of the dark. But now, as I sit here, drenched in blood, listening to the whispers, I realize the truth. The dark wasn't what I should have feared. It was myself. I don't know why I thought writing this would help. The words on the page only make the whispers louder, their voices more insistent. I can feel them crawling under my skin, pushing me towards something inevitable, something final. But I have to keep writing. Maybe if I finish this, they'll finally leave me alone. Or maybe I just want someone to know the truth before it's too late." After August 12th, everything became a blur. The nights blended into one another, each one darker and more chaotic than the last. I can barely remember the faces of those I've killed. They've all started to look the same, wide eyes, mouths twisted in terror, hands grasping at nothing as life slipped away, but there's one face I can't forget. His name was Mark. The Whispers didn't like Mark. He was different from the others. He was quiet, always watching, like he could see right through me. He never said a word when the others taunted me, but his silence was worse. It was as if he knew what was inside me, what I was capable of, and it didn't scare him. That made him dangerous. Mark lived at the edge of town, in an old house that creaked with every gust of wind. I remember standing outside his window, the knife heavy in my hand, the Whispers urging me forward. But when I looked inside, I saw something I didn't expect. Mark wasn't alone. There was a girl with him, someone I'd never seen before. Her face was hidden by a curtain of dark hair, her hands trembling as she spoke to him in hushed tones. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but Mark's expression was different, softer, almost afraid. The Whispers went quiet, as if they were trying to listen, too. I waited for what felt like hours, watching them, studying them. Something wasn't right. Mark was always so composed, so sure of himself, but here, in this dimly lit room with this strange girl, he looked vulnerable. The Whispers stirred, hungry, ready to pounce. But I hesitated. I needed to know who she was, what she meant to him. Why was she here, with him, in the middle of the night? When she finally left, slipping out the back door and into the shadows, I followed. The night air was cool against my skin, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the mystery. The Whispers were anxious, urging me to act, but I ignored them. This was something different. This was personal. She moved quickly, her footsteps light on the pavement, almost like she was gliding. She knew the town well, taking side streets and alleys, avoiding the main roads. I kept my distance, careful not to make a sound, but something told me she knew I was there. She never looked back, never acknowledged me, but there was an air of familiarity in the way she moved, as if she was leading me somewhere. We reached an old, abandoned warehouse at the edge of town, a place I thought no one knew about. I'd spent hours there, hiding from the world, from the Whispers. How did she know about it? I watched from the shadows as she slipped inside, the door creaking behind her. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't hesitate. I had to know who she was, why she was here. The warehouse was dark, the air thick with dust and decay. My footsteps echoed through the empty space, but she didn't turn around. She was standing in the center of the room, her back to me, waiting. For what? I didn't know. I tightened my grip on the knife, the cold metal reassuring against my skin. "Who are you?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was trembling. The Whispers were louder now, frantic, desperate to take control, but I held them back, focusing on her, on the way she stood so still, so calm. She didn't answer at first. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes hidden in the darkness. But I could feel her gaze, cold and unyielding, piercing through me. There was something familiar about her, something I couldn't quite place. The Whispers screamed in my head, telling me to end it, to silence her before she could say anything. But I couldn't move. "You don't remember me, do you?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper itself, but it cut through the noise in my head like a knife. I frowned, struggling to place her face, her voice. There was something there, at the edge of my memory, just out of reach. Should I? My voice wavered, betraying the uncertainty I felt. The Whispers grew louder, urging me to act, to kill, but I couldn't. Not yet. She took a step closer, her face coming into view in the dim light. And then it hit me, she wasn't a stranger. I'd seen her before, years ago, when the bullying had just started. She was younger then, just a kid, always in the background, watching, never saying a word. And then, one day, she was gone. Disappeared, just like that. No one ever talked about her, as if she never existed, but I remembered her now. I remembered the way she used to look at me, like she knew something no one else did. The way she'd silently follow me, always just out of reach. The whispers hissed in my ear, telling me to kill her, to stop her before she could say anything more. But I was frozen, trapped by the weight of my memories. You took everything from me. Her words were sharp, filled with a cold fury that sent a chill down my spine. You ruined my life, just like you ruined theirs. But I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. The whispers screamed in my head, a cacophony of rage and fear, but I couldn't move. She was right. I had taken everything from her, just like I had taken everything from the others. And now, she was here to take it back. I've been waiting for this day, she said, stepping closer, her eyes boring into mine. I've been waiting for you to remember, to realize what you've done. And now it's time to finish this. She reached into her pocket, pulling out something small and silver. I recognized it immediately, a locket, tarnished with age, but still intact. The same locket I had ripped from her neck all those years ago. The one I'd kept as a trophy, a reminder of what I was capable of. How did you get that? I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. Her smile was cold, devoid of any warmth. You left it for me, didn't you? A reminder of what you did. But I found it, and I kept it, waiting for the day I'd make you pay. The whispers were deafening now, a storm of voices in my head, each one telling me to kill her, to end it before she could do anything more. But I couldn't move. I was trapped, paralyzed by the weight of my guilt, my fear. She took another step closer, the locket swinging from her fingers. You're afraid, aren't you? Afraid of what you've done, of what you've become. But you should be more afraid of what's coming. And then, before I could react, she lunged at me. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor as she tackled me, the force of her attack knocking the breath from my lungs. The whispers screamed, but I couldn't hear them anymore. All I could hear was her voice, filled with a cold, unrelenting fury. This is for them, she hissed, her hands wrapping around my throat. For every life you've destroyed, for every drop of blood you've spilled. I struggled, tried to push her off, but she was stronger than she looked, her grip like iron. My vision blurred, the edges going dark as she squeezed tighter, cutting off my air. The whispers faded, replaced by a cold, empty silence, and then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. She released me, stepping back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my vision swimming. Remember this, she said, her voice cold and distant. Remember what you've done. Because this isn't over. Not yet. She turned and walked away, leaving me there in the darkness, alone with the echoes of the whispers, the weight of my guilt pressing down on me like a stone. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I realized the truth. I'm not the only monster in this story. And maybe I never was. The darkness wrapped around me like a shroud, suffocating, unyielding. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind was a chaotic swirl of fear, confusion, and anger. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening silence that was somehow worse. But her words echoed in my head, cutting through the fog like a blade. This isn't over. Not yet. I didn't know how long I lay there on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, my breath ragged, my body trembling. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging into minutes, the minutes into hours. But eventually, the haze began to lift, and I forced myself to sit up. The pain in my throat was sharp, a constant reminder of how close I'd come to death. But I wasn't dead. Not yet. And neither was she. Who was she? I knew her face, her voice, but the connection still eluded me. Why had she waited so long to confront me? And more importantly, what did she plan to do next? My mind raced with questions, but there were no answers, just the unsettling certainty that something was terribly wrong. I pushed myself to my feet, every muscle in my body protesting. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the only sound my own labored breathing. I scanned the room, searching for any sign of her, but she was gone. My vision blurred, the edges going dark as she squeezed tighter, cutting off my air. The whispers faded, replaced by a cold, empty silence, and then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. She released me, stepping back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my vision swimming. "Remember this," she said, her voice cold and distant. "Remember what you've done. Because this isn't over. Not yet." She turned and walked away, leaving me there in the darkness, alone with the echoes of the whispers, the weight of my guilt pressing down on me like a stone. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I realized the truth. I'm not the only monster in this story. And maybe I never was. The darkness wrapped around me like a shroud, suffocating, unyielding. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind was a chaotic swirl of fear, confusion, and anger. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening silence that was somehow worse. But her words echoed in my head, cutting through the fog like a blade. "This isn't over. Not yet." I didn't know how long I lay there on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, my breath ragged, my body trembling. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging into minutes, the minutes into hours. But eventually, the haze began to lift, and I forced myself to sit up. The pain in my throat was sharp, a constant reminder of how close I'd come to death. But I wasn't dead. Not yet. And neither was she, vanished into the night like a ghost, but she had left something behind, the locket. It lay on the ground, the dull silver glinting in the dim light. I hesitated for a moment, then bent down to pick it up, my fingers trembling as they closed around the cold metal. The locket was familiar, painfully so. I'd taken it from her years ago, during one of those dark nights when the whispers had first started to take control. I had thought it was just another trophy, another reminder of what I was capable of. But now, as I held it in my hand, I realized it was something more. Something deeper. The locket was a key to understanding who she was, why she had come for me. And maybe, just maybe, a key to stopping whatever horror was still to come. I opened the locket with a click, my breath catching as I saw what was inside. A photograph, small and worn with age, but still clear enough to make out the faces. A family, mother, father, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. The girl. It was her. And the boy, my heart stopped. It was me. I stumbled back, the locket slipping from my fingers and clattering to the floor. The world spun around me, my vision darkening as the truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. She wasn't just some random girl I had tormented. She was my sister. No. It couldn't be. I didn't have a sister. My family was. My memories were a blur, fragments of a life that seemed distant, disconnected from the person I had become. But there it was, staring up at me from the cold concrete, a piece of a past I had long since buried, a past that was now clawing its way back to the surface. The whispers returned, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent. They tried to drown out the truth, to pull me back into the darkness, into the violence. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't ignore her, I had to find her. I had to understand what she wanted, what she was planning. And most of all, I had to stop her, before she could finish what she had started. I left the warehouse, the locket burning in my pocket like a brand. The night air was cool, almost refreshing, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. The town was quiet, too quiet, the streets empty, the houses dark. But I knew she was out there, somewhere, waiting for me. The whispers guided me, pulling me through the shadows, down streets and alleys that were all too familiar. I moved quickly, my senses on high alert, every nerve tingling with the anticipation of what was to come. The fear that had gripped me in the warehouse was gone, replaced by a cold determination. I wouldn't let her win. I couldn't. She had led me to the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The iron gates stood open, rusted hinges groaning in the wind. I stepped inside, the gravel crunching under my boots, the headstones looming like silent sentinels in the dark. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of death, and I knew this was where it would end. I moved through the cemetery, my eyes scanning the shadows, every muscle tense, ready for the inevitable confrontation. The whispers were louder now, a steady hum in the back of my mind, guiding me, urging me forward. And then I saw her. She stood at the far end of the cemetery, her back to me, her head bowed. I could barely make out her silhouette in the darkness, but I knew it was her. She was waiting for me. The locket felt like a lead weight in my pocket, a reminder of the connection that had brought us both to this place. I approached her slowly, my footsteps silent on the gravel. The whispers urged me to attack, to end it before she could turn around, but I hesitated. Something in me, something buried deep, needed to hear what she had to say. "You found it," she said softly, her voice carrying on the wind. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge my presence in any other way, but I knew she was talking to me. "The locket. You remember now, don't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I remember. Some of it. But I don't understand. Why didn't you say anything before? Why didn't you come to me?" She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You wouldn't have listened. You were too far gone, too consumed by the darkness. And I was too afraid. I watched you become this monster, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save you." Her words cut deep, slicing through the fog in my mind, bringing memories to the surface, memories of a childhood spent in the shadows, of parents who were never there, of a brother and sister who had only ever had each other. And then, something changed. The darkness crept in, slowly at first, then all at once, until it consumed everything. I tried to forget, I whispered, my voice trembling. I tried to forget what I had done. What we had lost. She finally turned to face me, her eyes filled with a sorrow that I recognized all too well. "But you can't forget, can you? No matter how hard you try, it's always there, lurking in the corners of your mind, waiting to drag you back down." The whispers screamed in my head, a violent, chaotic roar that threatened to drown her out. But I forced myself to focus, to hold on to her words, her voice. "What do you want from me?" I asked. My voice barely audible. "Why did you come back now?" Her expression hardened, the sorrow replaced by something darker, more resolute. "I came back to end this. To put a stop to the madness before it consumes us both." I shook my head, confusion and fear warring within me. "End it? How? What are you going to do?" She stepped closer, and I could see the determination in her eyes, the resolve that had brought her here, to this place, to this moment. "I'm going to do what should have been done years ago. I'm going to stop you." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The whispers howled in protest, urging me to strike, to defend myself, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped by the weight of my past. My guilt, my fear, please, I whispered, my voice breaking. Don't do this. We can find another way. We can, there is no other way, she interrupted, her voice cold, unwavering. You're too far gone, too lost to be saved. And if I don't stop you now, you'll keep killing, keep destroying everything in your path. I can't let that happen. She reached into her coat, pulling out a small, black object. I recognized it immediately, a gun. My heart pounded in my chest, the whispers screaming in my ears, but I was paralyzed, unable to do anything but watch as she took aim. This is for them, she said, her voice filled with a cold, implacable fury. For every life you've taken, for every person you've hurt. This is the only way to end the cycle. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the barrel of the gun, to the cold, determined gaze of the girl who had once been my sister. And in that moment, I knew there was no escape, no redemption. The darkness had consumed me, and now, it was going to take me down. The shot rang out, shattering the silence of the cemetery, echoing off the tombstones like a death knell. I felt the impact before I heard the sound, a sharp, burning pain in my chest that radiated through my entire body. I stumbled back, the world tilting as I hit the ground hard, the cold earth rising to meet me, but the pain in my chest was all I could focus on. It spread like fire, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat a reminder that I was still alive, at least for now. The whispers were gone, silenced by the shock, by the realization that this was the end. She stood over me, her face a mask of sorrow and determination. The gun trembled in her hand, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. The same eyes that had once looked up to me, full of trust and admiration. Now, they were filled with something darker, something I had put there. I didn't want it to come to this, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. But I had no choice. You left me no choice. The pain was unbearable, but there was something else, an overwhelming sense of clarity. For the first time in years, the fog that had clouded my mind lifted, and I could see everything clearly. The blood on my hands, the lives I'd taken, the monster I'd become. It all came crashing down on me, a tidal wave of guilt and regret. Maybe you're right, I managed to choke out, my voice weak, barely a whisper. Maybe this is the only way. She knelt beside me, the gun still in her hand, her eyes searching mine for something, understanding, forgiveness, maybe even the brother she had lost all those years ago. But I wasn't him anymore. I wasn't sure if I ever had been. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. But you're not the same person I knew. You're not, I know, I interrupted, my voice trembling. I know what I am. And I'm sorry. For everything. The words felt hollow, too little too late. But they were all I had left to offer. The pain in my chest intensified, and I knew I didn't have much time. She seemed to know it too, her grip on the gun tightening as if she was afraid to let go. You don't have to do this, I whispered, my breath growing shallower with each passing second. You can walk away. Leave this behind. Start over. She shook her head, her expression hardening once more. I can't. You know I can't. This will never be over until one of us is gone. Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. And I knew she was right. This wasn't just about revenge, or justice. It was about ending the cycle of violence, the darkness that had consumed us both. She raised the gun again, her hand steady now, her eyes fixed on mine. I closed my eyes, accepting the inevitable. Maybe this was the way it was always meant to end, with me paying for my sins, with her being the one to deliver justice. But then, there was a sound, a rustling in the bushes, a faint whisper carried on the wind. My eyes snapped open, and I saw her hesitate, her gaze flickering to the shadows beyond the cemetery. She wasn't alone. We weren't alone. Who's there? She demanded, her voice sharp, the gun swinging toward the darkness. But there was no answer, just the rustling of leaves, the sound of footsteps growing closer. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and something else, hope. She backed away from me, her eyes darting around the cemetery, searching for the source of the noise. But there was nothing, no one. Just the night, pressing in on us from all sides. And then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. At first, I thought I was seeing things, that the blood loss was making me hallucinate. But the figure was real, tall, shadowy, moving with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. I couldn't make out the face, but there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it seemed to glide through the night like it belonged there. "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice trembling now, the gun shaking in her hand. But the figure didn't answer. It just kept coming, closer and closer, until it was standing right in front of us. And then, it stopped. The silence was deafening. The tension thick enough to choke on. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, the pain in my chest a dull throb now, overtaken by the fear that gripped me. The figure stood still for a moment, as if contemplating something, and then, slowly, it turned its head to look down at me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, cold and unyielding, piercing through me like a knife. Who are you?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it reached out, one long, pale hand extending toward me. I flinched, expecting pain, but instead, it simply touched the locket that had fallen from my hand, its fingers brushing against the cold metal. And then, it spoke. "You're not done yet." The voice was low, a whisper that seemed to echo in my mind, reverberating through my entire body. It was a voice I recognized, but from where, I couldn't say. It was as if it had always been there, lurking in the background, waiting for this moment. She stepped back, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, the gun still raised, but I could see the uncertainty in her expression. She didn't know what to do, and neither did I. The figure's presence had changed everything, turned the certainty of my death into something else. The figure reached down, picking up the locket, and then, slowly, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as it had come. I stared after it, my mind reeling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was different now, less sharp, more like a dull ache. She lowered the gun, her eyes fixed on the spot where the figure had disappeared. What just happened?" she whispered, her voice shaky, uncertain. "I don't know," I replied, struggling to sit up. The world spun around me, but I managed to stay conscious. "But I think it's not over." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear, confusion, and something else, something I hadn't seen in her before. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that something had changed, that the darkness that had surrounded us for so long had shifted, revealing something else, something deeper, more terrifying, but I also knew that I wasn't alone anymore. She was here, with me, and together, we might have a chance. A chance to fight back, to uncover the truth, to finally put an end to the nightmare that had consumed us both. I reached out, and after a moment's hesitation, she took my hand, helping me to my feet. We stood there in the cemetery, the night pressing in around us, the whispers gone, replaced by a heavy silence. But in that silence, I heard something else, a faint, distant sound, like the beating of wings, or the rustling of leaves in the wind. And I knew that whatever was coming, whatever waited for us in the darkness, we would face it together. The ending was not written yet, and maybe it never would be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope, and that, more than anything, terrified me.